Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Serious, desert dwellers, what's the strangest/scariest thing you've seen out in the sands? Used to be a wildlife biologist for the USFS. I have come across most things that live in the desert. I haven't been intimidated by most until the day I was out doing invasive grass surveys and a swarm of killer bees moving the hive flew past my partner and me. It looked like a dark cloud floating above the ground and sounded like a prop jet. Easily the most scared I have been in nature. My body flashed with heat, and I was completely frozen. When bees move they all surround the queen in flight. If they had noticed us as a threat, allergic or not, they could have killed both of us easily. Probably the Salton Sea. From a distance and overhead, it looks like any other refreshing lake or reservoir. An oasis in the desert sands. But it is landlocked with no outgoing river, so the salts and minerals just keep building up every year. You head toward the beach, there is a beach of sand and ancient, crushed up shells, and the blueness of the water gets darker and darker until you realize that the blueness just the reflection of the sky, and the water itself is black as tar and the smell, like rotten fish and spoiled eggs. Dead fish everywhere, and flies. You don't even want to get close to the water nowadays, but if you did swim in it you would float, the salt in it is so concentrated. Desert enthusiast here. One night friends and I went to the desert for a 2-night camping trip. On the way there we were hit by heavy rainfall. By the time we got into the desert it was cool and damp. We ended up going for a walk in the dark, and at one point my friend said I could hear a snake. I say to him it just sounds like the wind. So, he opens the flashlight and right next to his feet there's a Palestinian viper curled up in a defensive pose. Snake has orange eyes under the light. Needless to say, we were lucky no one trampled on the little one. This might not sound so scary until you have seen it in person. I was out camping in the desert and some idiot in the campground left a large cooler of beer unlocked. Javelinas, wild pigs, got into the cooler and proceeded to get drunk on beer. Wild pigs are not the nicest creatures and when they get drunk they don't get happy drunk, they get angry drunk. They rampage through the campground tearing apart everything they could find, squealing like tortured banshees everywhere. Then they all collapsed in a heap in the middle of the campground, passed out. It was a scary 10 minutes. Once on a remote dirt road in Joshua Tree, I saw a decomposing rattlesnake in the road, so I pulled over to inspect it. It was 3 to 4 feet long and had been dead perhaps a week, so it was pretty much intact to tell its story. The snake had been run over, and I found him with his neck turned sharply, biting his body. I was in Butte Valley a few months after the Death Valley Germans disappeared, and explored some of the places they went. It was a shame because there were 2 well-equipped cabins they passed less than an hour walk, where they could thrive for months if necessary. In the other direction, the wash is soft and sandy, and walking it was like walking down a down escalator on the few steep parts. It intersects the road eventually, and the lights of the distant town of Shoshone are visible along that canyon as well. Instead, it turned out they made a grueling hike over an extremely difficult mountain range expecting to run into guards patrolling the remote military base they saw on a map. It's actually a seldom used bombing range, protected by remoteness and inaccessibility. It's really remote out there and occasionally spooky at night by yourself. Also in that area was the cabin where Charles Manson hid and was finally captured. The bathroom cabinet he was found hidden in was tiny, like the size of a laundry hamper. It made me think of those pictures of a little kid managing to get stuck inside a claw machine. The next time I went through the area, someone had pried this out of the tiny bathroom, leaving nails and holes in the plaster. Sometime after this the whole cabin was burned down. Very anticlimactic as Wild West famous places go. I've explored many interesting but quite dangerous mineshafts. An old silver and borax mine in the Calico Mountains had 2 to 3 foot tree trunks as timbers holding up the hanging wall where the ore was removed. Over time, The weight caused a few of these to crush and splinter in the middle. There were 3 rickety 20-foot ladders to a lower level, which had rails and a low 5-foot roof. One time I was taking my young teen nephews out to a remote but well-known desert canyon for a weekend of quadding and exploring. A ragged woman was walking down the road, which was almost a mile from canyon mouth to the paved road. Not in distress, but apparently grown bored with whatever party was happening in the hills and going to hitch a ride back to Barstow where the party favors are never running low. There was no room to drive around her, so I slowed down and stopped a distance away. She kept walking toward the motorhome at the same pace till she got to the bumper and stopped, staring at me with her ragged tweeter face. After a longish minute, when I was wondering if I were going to have to get out and move her so we could continue, she got this determined look and started marching around to the passenger side. As soon as she was clear of the front, I gunned it and drove off, before she could start trying the doors. It was the most unexpected place to encounter a stereotypical opportunistic urban junkie. I would honestly say it was what I call to this day the Mirage Man. Note, I wasn't living there, but broke down there. I was somewhere in the California desert when my friend's car died. Neither of us had smartphones, and even then there was no guarantee we would have had a signal. My friend wanted to walk. I said it was a really bad idea. He insisted, and I really didn't want to be left alone for who knew how long without water. We started to walk, and every so often looked back in case a car went by. It was perhaps only after an hour we noticed someone off in the distance that appeared to be following us. My friend asked me if we should turn around. I thought this was too strange. We were in the desert, while the sun was up, basically in the middle of nowhere. Why would someone else be walking? My friend wasn't entirely convinced, and suggested the person might have struck his car and was also walking into tow. I pointed out that we had been walking for an hour, and this was the first time we had seen him. It was too monumental of a coincidence that someone could hit a parked car on the side of the road and catch up to us this fast. Long story short, we keep walking, but that figure is closing the distance. We were getting genuinely creeped out. We quickened up our pace as much as we dared in the heat, and every glance back the man was getting closer and closer. Not exponentially so, but noticeable. We found a truck stop not far off and moved just shy of a jog to sit down and get water from the vending machines. My friend kept watching, and pointed out the man was now holding steady and not getting any further away or closer. My friend asked a driver for a ride after calling his motor club to bail him out. Our eyes were on the man, still there. We got the gas and kept our eyes on the man in the distance. The driver didn't see him. The closer we got to the dead car, now the further the man seemed to be. We made it to the car, with our pursuer nowhere to be seen. Never saw it again. My friend thinks that was death itself, and had we not gotten to the truck stop then it would have gotten us. I live on the edge of the Mojave Desert. It gets to 115 plus in the summers, so I like to go on long walks by moonlight in the early hours of the morning out in the desert. I was at least 6 miles outside of town when this happened. I know, it's not the smartest, but I kind of like being alone out there. It kind of makes me feel a little more alive in a primal way. It's difficult to describe the feeling. Anyway, a few weeks ago I was out there doing my thing when I heard a screeching noise. Like an inhuman high-pitched whining scream that slowly increased in pitch and volume. The source was within 10 or 15 yards. I fumbled around to turn on my phone's flashlight just in time to see something's leg disappear into the brush. It was like that scene in Signs in the Cornfield where Mel Gibson's character shines his light around just in time to see the alien's foot disappear into the corn. I don't know what it was. I assume it was a tweaker or something because I can't think of any animals in the area that sound like that. If it were a human though, they would have had to scramble on all fours to be able to disappear into the sagebrush like that. Needless to say, I didn't stick around to find out exactly what it was. This was in Washington County, Utah, if anybody had an idea of what it might have been. Second best guess is a cougar W/severe nasal congestion. I live in the Sonoran Desert, if this counts, but apparently a few Mexican gray wolves somehow got into our area a few years back. I looked out my back window, I was 7, and was staring straight into the eyes of an enormous gray wolf. I was used to seeing coyotes, but not that. Thankfully, all our usual outdoor pets were inside. They, 3 of them, checked out our yard for a while and then left. For a couple of years after that, people in the area reported that apparently they took over the local coyote pack and were leading them to do some pretty bold stuff. I was in the desert in southern Colorado, staying at the Great Sand Dunes National Park. There's a full view of the dunes from the campsites. It was really spectacular. I left my tent to go to the bathroom at maybe 10 p.m. It was summer so hadn't been dark for exceptionally long. When I looked out towards the dunes I saw what I can only describe as what looked like the circle of light an old, non-LED, flashlight makes if you were to hold it up to a wall, except it was huge and purple and more dim, as if the source of the light was very far away. I watched this giant circle of light cross horizontally over the dunes in a wavy motion and then it disappeared. I know that sounds bizarre. I've seen a lot of weird things in my life and this I have no explanation for. It wasn't an orb, it was seemingly flat against the dunes, and if it were being projected from a light source I couldn't see where it came from, or how it would be possible since it covered about a quarter of the dune. Driving home one night, I looked up as I stopped at an intersection and saw a yellow light, exactly like the street lights on the corner, but above them. Then, just as I was contemplating how that didn't look quite right, it disappeared like it was shooting off into the distance. Could have been nothing. Could have been something. Aliens, stellar phenomena, hallucination. All I know is it was weird and now I have a UFO story. My reaction was just huh. That's a mystery that'll taunt me till I die, and then I turned and went home. I want to consider frozen lakes kind of like deserts 6. I was in the middle of the lake walking my dog on a clear but very windy day. The lake is huge and would take about 2 hours to cross, but I generally stayed near the middle of the lake. At one point, there was a large air pocket escaping from below but not in the usual way they burst up. They usually look like mini volcanoes of ice, but this one looked like a larger cylinder rising out of the water. To be clear, there is no motion to these things as they slowly rise up over days and are usually 2 feet thick. This one had not burst yet, and my dog kept running on top of it. I was getting nervous so I pushed her off the top as gently as I could, and then I heard it. A big crack sound that vibrated and disappeared as it follows the crack elsewhere. My life flashed before my eyes as this was mid-January in Quebec. I.e., cold and I'm in the middle of a frozen lake, far from the shore. Upon falling through the hole on top, I was miraculously caught by a sandbar in the middle of the lake and soaked my boots in less than a foot of water. I laughed maniacally as I easily crawled out of the mini dome created by the air pocket. Now, every summer, I try to find that shallow spot with my kayak to reminisce. Definitely the 7.3 Landers earthquake in 1992. We were only 2 miles from the epicenter. The experience was the scariest part. But seeing how much the road split, so much we couldn't drive over it and had to turn around. Scariest event of my life. The sound was insane. We were in a 1-room tiny cabin. It wakes us up. My friend's dad is yelling at us to take cover. It's so loud we can't hear him and he's only 15 feet away. We couldn't even stand up, the shaking was so violent. The sound, loudest thing I've ever heard. After it stops, the front door is stuck, and we can't open it. A neighbor came over and helped us get it open. We go outside and the surrounding valley is silent with an eerie dust cloud hovering around the local vistas and boulder mountains, basically small mountains that are piles of huge boulders. We pack up and get the heck out there, and head for home, 3 hours away. We stop off the highway which is between Palm Springs and the backside of Big Bear Mountain. We have a huge view of the mountain in the distance. Then a pretty big aftershock hit. Within seconds, the entire mountain becomes engulfed in a huge dust cloud from all the shaking. Later we found out that huge boulders were being dislodged and bouncing down the mountain. We eventually got home. I had nightmares for months. I'd wake up screaming. I was only 15. I have points from it to this day. I get so spooked if I even think I feel the ground move. Even if it's a tiny earthquake, I have a panic attack and start crying. Back around 2010, I was living in the middle of nowhere in the northern outback of Australia in a town called Halls Creek. It was about halfway between Broome and Darwin, i.e., hundreds of kilometers away from either place, and consisted mainly of a hotel for people traveling between Darwin and Broome. I was living there and working at this hotel with a few other random backpackers and vagabonds, and on our days off we would go on little adventures. A drive out to a swimming hole, a hike in the desert, a campfire on a hilltop. Fun stuff. One time there were a few of us driving out on some lonely desert road, and we came upon a large pile of dead cows. There were about a dozen of them just 20 m or so off the side of the roadway, dead and bloated. No sign of how they got there or why. Desert resident. Wendy, children are real. Drove by a coyote standing up on his hind legs on my way home from work. My office is in the middle of a res. Never forget it. Didn't print the full names out because a Navajo friend of mine told me not to, and frankly I'm not going to be the kind of stupid white person that thinks I know better than others. Not a superstitious person, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't right. So, this was in Namibia when I was really young. I was walking ahead of the group, completely distracted. I decided to let the person in front of me walk ahead. And good thing I did, because we ran into a puff adder, very venomous snake found exclusively in southern Africa, I believe. And then we ran into another snake about 350 m from it. To make my fear of snakes really great that day, there was another puff adder about 400 m from that one. It was a sweltering day, so it makes sense thinking back on it. Another time I was driving with my dad down the Namibian desert roads and saw an old car that had crashed into the trees years ago. Oh. And when we opened a watermelon on a camping trip, at the campsite we'd found, hordes of bees swarmed the camp. So, we had to pack up and move to another camp. So, I spent a lot of time in the desert. In addition to many other answers here, relating to the flora and fauna and crazy people. I have one for you that I'm not sure I've posted anywhere before, and to this day I still have no idea what it was. You see a lot of crazy stuff in the desert. But for me, this one took the cake. Story time. We used to go out camping on the weekends and sit around the campfire at night while rock climbing and hiking during the day. One particular night some friends and I were hanging out on top of one of the nearby rocks before turning in for bed a bit away from the campfire and tents, just stargazing and chatting about whatever. All of a sudden, every solar star in the sky rapidly moved and created a perfect circle, a ring of stars within a second. Stayed there for maybe 1 to 2 seconds, collapsed in on itself, then popped back to their own position in the sky. The few of us that were stargazing all collectively went hookah and confirmed with each other that we just saw WTF we thought we saw. Never saw anything like that again, never heard or read any similar accounts. It was weird, man. I feel like it's important to mention that none of us were under any influence of drugs or alcohol or whatever, since people I've told were like, OMG, how high were you? You're crazy desert people and you're peyote like. No man, not my thing. Anyone who's spent long enough in the desert will tell you there's lots of stuff you can see that's crazy to explain: ball lightning, crazily behaving shooting stars, those scary moments when all of the coyotes just stop howling and everything gets dead quiet. It's eerie when it happens. The desert can be a loud place at night. Usually that means something bad is nearby, like a mountain lion or something. Over the years I've seen lots and lots of strange things. Most are explainable or debunked, like how ball lightning is absolutely not a UFO. just spooky nature, but that star circle thing was the only one I can't really figure out. Bonus, if you ever get lucky, what's known as heat lightning in the desert is really cool to watch. Perfectly natural, but man is it neat. Okay, so you will not believe me, but I am 100% telling the truth. I was on a stretch of lone highway somewhere in between Death Valley, California and Las Vegas, Nevada. No cars or anything really for about 50 miles both ways, and at about 2 a.m. we saw what looked to be a hairless, inbred, mangy, scary dog-looking thing that wasn't a dog in our headlights crossing the road. Me and my entire family are almost certain it was the chupacabra. I did some research, and I am convinced what I saw was the elusive chupacabra. IL tries to find a link of what I saw so you have an idea of what it actually looks like. I used to live out in the Mojave, and my dad was taking us to the mall one day. We drove through Yerma, which is this tiny town. There's a whole bunch of abandoned houses out there, a really good diner called Peggy Sue's, a high school, and a ghost town attraction. Well, my dad wanted to show us the dry lake beds out there because we had never actually been on one before. So, he drove out onto one, and it's about as exciting as you would imagine, dry, cracked dirt. Well, we kept driving, and right before we were about to get on the road again, we came across something, and at first we couldn't tell what it was, so we got out and went to look at it. It was a baby stroller completely decorated head to toe with ribbons, beads, pinwheels, flowers, gems, etc. Totally decked out. Like imagine a Mardi Gras float but as a baby stroller. Not sure if it was the stroller of a baby that had passed away that was decorated in memoriam, or if it was an art piece, or maybe a homeless person's way of carrying around their belongings that they decorated. But it was just there all alone, drifting in the wind sometimes. I have a picture of it on my old DSi, lol, I wish I could share it here. Just imagine walking out there at night and seeing some important thing scooting across the lakebed covered in stuff. The weirdest thing I've ever seen was when family friends from the Midwest visited us and wanted to see a real ghost town, none of that commercialized shit. So, after some research on my mom's end, we take them to this ghost town that took a 4-hour drive in a tiny rental car up the side of a mountain with a sheer drop to get to. After an eternity we get to this ghost town. It's on the top of this mountain and it was tiny. It lived up to its name and looked real run down. It's so small that we basically can see the whole thing from the car, so we loop around and stop in front of this rundown house to decide if we will get out or just leave. Before we can really discuss it, this man in pants that were rolled down at the waist and rolled up in the pant legs so much it looked like a diaper runs out of the house flailing his arms and yelling. He asks us what we're doing here, and we said we were looking for the ghost town. He perks up and says that it's $5 for admission, and then turns to me and my friend, both 12 at the time, and says, "Kids get in for free," with a menacing expression. He tells us gals can go for a swim in his cement pond and starts rambling about how great the pool is, especially on a sweltering day. We seemed to all be in agreement that we would not like the tour or to swim in the pool, so we left. We drove forward to see that the pool was actually a really small pond that was concretely green on the top. When we lived in the deserts of southern Utah, there would be scorpion swarms at least once each summer with hordes of them all over our backyard. We'd usually discover them taking the dog out late at night. We learned to always shine a blacklight flashlight out back before letting the pups out. Scorpions fluoresce blue under blacklight. There would be thousands sometimes. Tarantula hawks, though not really a threat to humans, are big, loud, and scary when they fly past you. Scorpions, we have a lot of palm trees in my area and they love to hide inside them. I've been stung 3 times personally. Killer bees, they have seriously adapted to living in the desert, and if you think yellow jackets are bad, some killer bee species will make those things look docile. I've seen them take over people's cars. Haboobs, as we like to call them. Basically, a sand/dust tsunami. Some are worse than others, still scary watching them come your way from a distance. Please don't try to drive though, visibility drops quickly in those things, and wear goggles if you are going to try. Going out into one, sand in your eyes is not a pleasant feeling. Don't underestimate how scary heatstroke can be, you can die. One of my aunts who came from Michigan to see me graduate got it within an hour of being out in the sun. It affects everyone differently. Bring plenty of water and take shelter when you need it. Don't think it's only a couple more minutes of walking. Within those couple minutes you could already be delirious and eventually pass out. Checked with my fiancé who grew up in southern Nevada about his scariest thing about the desert. He was at his dad's place, outdoors at night walking around, getting some air. It was dead quiet, except for footfalls behind him in the dirt. Didn't matter how or where he turned or what direction, it stopped when he did and started after he started. He was stalked by a puma in his own yard. I have a tough time calling it a yard. All the yards I grew up with / lived with were grass and or had fences. Out there it's just dirt, and your dirt run into the neighbor's dirt right on the surface, not hidden under the fence or tree lined or whatever. A few weeks later, same town, different property, same thing, stalked by a cougar at night and couldn't see a thing. In Arizona, several times, I've been doing simply fine and then suddenly get a guttural, foreboding sense of doom. Like a really heavy feeling. It's like the panic button sets off in my brain and I get the creeps big time. Never could properly articulate what that was. I could be in the middle of nowhere or I could be in the middle of the city, and I'd feel it. Turns out, quite a few people do. Cave Creek and the road to Bartlett Lake have done that to me a lot, as well as the area by Thunderbird Mountain. I was at a training facility in southeast New Mexico, about 8 p.m. and running the perimeter of the base in the middle of winter. The whole night, I get an odd sense of bad juju in the air that slowly builds. My first lap, about 2.5 to 3 miles, something just said to pack a flashlight in my camelback, and it was like my brain was screaming at me for being such a person and not bringing it. I was running with like 6 other guys this lap. I got back to the barracks and grabbed my flashlight and put it in my camelback. Everybody else had called it quits and that they were done for the night. I'm about 1/4 of the way done with this second lap when I see movement about 100-200 m in front of me. It's near pitch black. You can see the stars bright as hell and you can barely see where you're supposed to run. I stop and shine my flashlight. Just a man standing there in jeans and a red hoodie, hood up, facing away from me. Doesn't react to the light. Big red flag. Just about everybody on this facility has a huge sense of awareness and would turn to face the light, or at least look at that who's running in the dark. I'm wearing my fancy earbuds that can either cancel out or amplify sounds while you're listening to music so you can keep situational awareness and even talk to someone with those things in. I called out that I was sorry and didn't mean to flash him like that. No response, but I tried to blame it on my earbuds. I'm running past him, I try to apologize again. As I'm turning my head to say that, he turns 90 degrees to his right and faces away from me again. The whole time, I'm getting gassed, and I just feel in my gut something isn't right here. I felt like if I stopped running, whatever he was going to eat me or some stuff. Something bad. Just keep running, don't stop, get away from this guy. I couldn't get over that experience. Still can't. He never responded to the light, nor my 2 apologies for shining on him in the first place. In a car with my friends, on the highway, but it was cutting through the middle of the desert I'm from, turned my head and saw a mountain lion crouching by the pavement waiting to run across it. On the other side though, one time we were camping, and a fox tried to open the tent I was in by my brother left an open bag of jerky in there with me. It was cute after my blood didn't feel like ice by I woke up to hear something trying to open the zipper. Grew up in Baja California. My family has a ranch out in the middle of nowhere. There's mountain lions and venomous snakes galore, but the scariest thing is also one of the tiniest. We don't have many claims to fame, but we're home to one of the deadliest scorpions on the planet. It always made going to the outhouse an adventure within itself. Out in the desert at night climbing around the mesa near Albuquerque. My friend went running down a hill into the darkness and almost as fast came running back up. Said he ran into a bunch of floating little lights. A pack of coyotes were looking at him and their eyes were glowing from the city lights when he found the underlying cause of the hill. We went back home then, watching over our shoulders the whole time. Maybe not really the desert, but technically all happened in the Sonoran Desert while 16 or younger. Was walking around right after sunset in my neighborhood and heard a loud squeal. In the small light I saw a jabalina staring at me when I turned around. Was once out in a neighbor's Jeep off-roading as a kid and saw a jaguar or bobcat trying to chase us down as we were on a stretch of flat ground up against some hills. There's a part of the Salt River we call Chalk City that's in an eastern suburb of Phoenix. I grew up in the neighborhood connected to a farm that owned the land next to it, so would often spend time in the river during dry seasons. One time while exploring on the opposite side where most people are, a group of people decided to start shooting at the side of the riverbed. Heard the bullets zoom past right above my head, just laid down below a berm so I wouldn't get hit and waited till they left as I was just a 16-year-old at the time and scared shitless. Another time while at Chalk City my friends and I were exploring a small cave after dark when a pack of coyotes started howling. They were getting closer and continuing to howl, so we booked it back towards the car a half-mile away. Even though we were running they were getting closer, so we drove off like the Roadrunner. While driving around at 2 a.m. near a popular tubing area, a horse appeared out of nowhere as I drove over a bump in the road. Had to swerve at the last second. Horse couldn't have been in a less visible spot. And not technically a desert story, but, as a kid there was a cornfield behind our houses and one of my friend's backyards was connected to it, so we spent a lot of time in it. There were also cattle on the other side of the neighborhood that had a citrus patch connecting. While in the middle of the field at midnight we heard what sounded like an angry bull and saw the corn moving right by us. The second it started approaching us we ran back to his backyard wall and jumped back over, nearly scaring ourselves. And to finish it off, there was a reservation across the street from my childhood neighborhood. The Salt River went through it, so we would often walk onto it. Saw a bunch of police officers and a helicopter nearby, so we investigated only to find out 2 bodies were laying at the bottom of the dry river on the rest. I build off-road rigs, Jeeps, that we take to Moab, Utah twice a year. Long story short, a friend and I went wheeling one night towards this trail called High Dive. Minded he's on crutches with a broken foot. It's 3 a.m. We are by ourselves. Added I flipped the Jeep. We smashed our radio antenna and unfortunately the hood caved in due to the wreck and cracked our battery. No phone service. Jeep is dead in the water. I decided to start walking back to the nearest road by myself. Pitch black and phone is on 6%. Within a mile of the walk. I heard it. Something is running around me. I see light bars off in the distance, so I start jogging towards it. Every 30 seconds to a minute I hear it again. I cannot tell for the life of me what it was. I finally make it to the road and start hauling ass at this point. A Suburban pulls up with some locals in it. I tell them the situation and I hop in and start going towards my Jeep. Once in the Jeep I explain to them what I've been hearing. Their faces light up. We turn onto the dirt road that leads to the trailhead. And lo and behold. What's 50 to 60 feet in front of the car? Huge mountain lion. This person has been sizing me up the whole 3-mile walk. I'm getting goosebumps typing this. I lived in Australia, not too far country but far enough, and was in my room on my phone one night and was sitting on my phone as I went to go to bed. I started to hear voices and banging around the house. I thought it was from me not taking my meds that day and that it was with me, so I went to the kitchen and listened to stuff, but it was still there. And then my brother, who was 7 at the time, came out and was like, "Stop, I can't sleep," and I said to him, "Shut up and listen, it was just saying shit. Like, come closer, don't hurt me," and banging on the back sheet. I'm now 20 and it still haunts me. The most dangerous thing in the desert is the climate and people. Things like a scorpion, rattlesnakes, tarantulas, etc. will all leave you alone and don't care to harm you nor want you to. People are talking about killing rattlesnakes or killing scorpions when in reality you are the one who was being the aggressor and the danger in that instance, whereas the animal is just going about its business. If you are going to the desert, go responsibly, and both expect and respect the wildlife the desert presents to you. I'm a bit late. But, when I was in high school my biology class required doing a survival trip. We were trained in how to survive in the desert for 24 hours. You were assigned a campsite alone about half a mile in each direction from the next person. I had requirements on how to set up my camp and I set about doing that, but I was placed in my account. As the sun began to set, I started my fire and began to settle in for the night. Last bit of daylight faded out. I noticed a glowing ball on the horizon. It looks like the moon. I was amazed how bright and big it was. After glancing away and re-looking at it, I noticed that it was increasing in size and rising fast. The white color turned a greenish color. I quickly realized it was not the moon. As it rose in the sky, it eventually began to shrink until it became a constant size. It continued across the horizon until it was out of sight. I was super freaked out about it as I didn't know what it was. I'm not superstitious and I don't believe in UFOs. But, that experience had me re-examine those beliefs. I later found out it was an ICBM test missile launched hundreds of miles away. I was on a field trip in the central Utah desert in 1999 during a Mormon cricket swarm. The road was a blanket of them. There was a tower of gulls, literally 10,000 of them circling in a massive tower hundreds of feet high, and they would periodically swoop down and gorge only to vomit them back up. Sometimes they'd be too full to fly. The crickets would swarm and eat them. The smell. Oh gods, the smell. We had to stop every 10 miles or so to clean out the radiator. They completely clogged the fins. For context, hold out your thumb. Yes, that big. I did not see this. My fiance's dog did. We've put together a few details based on what we know of his history and what we see of his behavior. Dog is now 12 and we live in a large city with lots of thunderstorms. Dog hears thunder, frets, and paces, drooling and a little wild around the eyes. Once the rain starts, you'd expect a dog worried about a storm to go into the bathroom or the basement. Not this dog, who was born an hour's drive south of Las Vegas. Rain comes down, he goes up. Dog's been through one of those, it's drier than Satan's D, where did all this water come from and where is my car going without me, storms. He hadn't been in that desert for one of those storms for the better part of a decade. Still terrified of being washed away. The storm I did see in the desert was at Phoenix Airport. Odd-numbered gate on the left of the hallway, even on the right, but all open with huge glass windows. The storm rolled in from over Texas as the sun went down, so the east windows went from sunset purple to Dementor's robe gray in 90 seconds. The west windows were still cheerful shades of peach and pink and gold as the hills went gradually purple, gray in the airport's shadow. Crack flash, the sky opened up, like turning on a shower, and the eastern runway was instantly 1/2 inch deep in water. A trip from the door under the waiting area window to under the wing of the parked and waiting plane, maybe a 5-second sprint, soaked one security man through his polo so water ran down into his shoes. Downhill, and thus downstream, of that cloudburst, 3 different cars were washed off the road in a storm that passed in less than 2 minutes. We let the dog hide in the bedroom and shake when there's a storm. We get it. When I was a wee lad I lived out in Powwow, Australian slang for rural outback, of Western Australia. I have so many stories, but I'll only tell 2 for now. In both stories I was the weird one. First story. I had a penal for a while and when I was about 11 he came and visited me for a weekend. One day we were out walking in the desert because there wasn't much to do when he was a bored city kid and didn't want to be around my family of dairy farming cowboys with Australian accents anymore. I found a black-headed python on the side of the path and picked it up. It's a non-venomous species and I have done it many times before. And the kid proceeded to lose his stuff. Spooked the snake and it bit me on the arm. Snake bites feel like a pinch if it's coming from a non-venomous species, and it's happened to me many times before, so I didn't care, but the poor guy fainted, and I had to carry him back to my place. Second story. I was walking with my granddad who had his rifle with him trying to look for brumbies, Australian wild horses, pretty much the Australian version of a Mustang, and or camels on our property. We were planning to shoot them because our dirt isn't used to hoofed animals and it really weirded up the place. We see a big stallion, my granddad takes aim and shoots her in the eyes. At that moment two tourists butt up and start berating us. My granddad just tells them to get off his property. They got increasingly angry and tried to attack him, so he just nonchalantly aimed the rifle at their head and then they ran away. Rip Granddad. By the way, wild horses and camels are a massive problem around here, so we do need to take care of them. We never believed in horses on the farm and always used motorbikes instead. I did have a brown and gray mixed breed mare who was treated more like a dog than horse and who I love very much. I love animals, but where do you live on a farm thing need to be done. I love cows, chickens, pigs and rabbits and I still eat them. I also love the dogs and the barn cats, but I still had to put them down with a rifle when they got too old. It made me upset, but I had to be done.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.